Welcome back to our Return of the King podcast as we're talking about the end times during this series. I'm Lance Wigton. I'm the communications director here at Real Life Ministries. And once again, I'm with lead pastor Jim Putman, and we're talking about the different topics of the end times. This sermon is on the return of Jesus and the actual rapture. And I'd first like to say, Jim, I can't find the word rapture in the Bible.
Yeah, it literally means to be caught up. And we're caught up with the Lord in the air, the book of 1 Thessalonians tells us. And this has been, again, a matter of debate. Mm-hmm. Remember, we talked about how each of the valid sort of biblical views of the end times have a second return of Christ. Now, some of them have what some literature calls a secret rapture, which is the Left Behind series where Jesus comes and all those who are dead in Christ and all those who are saved are caught up with the Lord in the air. So that's where you see clothes kind of left all around, people were just taken, boom, clothes. They're in the
secret being that there is no, Jesus is here. It's just boom, rapture, and no one even saw it coming.
So the world sees people disappeared, mm-hmm. but they don't know how that happened. There wasn't like the trumpet where everybody heard that, and Jesus actually doesn't. People with that view say that Jesus doesn't actually touch the ground, which would be the kind of the second visible return of the King, and when he does that. That's the judgment. That's the beginning of the millennium. That's the rule of Christ for 1,000 years, and then the judgment will come after that. Whether you believe in the rapture as the dispensational pre-tribulational do, the Left Behind series do, where it's kind of a rapture of the saints and it's invisible, mm-hmm. or you believe that all that happens at the same time, which is the physical return. Jesus both catches people up in the air first, then comes down with them and comes to the earth that way. So it's kind of the rapture plus the physical return at the same time. Both those views believe that there's a physical return of Christ. They just would put it in a two-stage sort of a mm-hmm. situation instead of a one-stage.
But as far as things that we agree on, because it's in the Bible, yeah. We are going to be caught up somehow.
We're going to be caught up. And for those who are caught up, let's say it's the dispensational view, the Left Behind series view. Once you're caught up with the Lord, you will be with the Lord forever. Okay? In one form or another. You may, if the dispensational view would say there's going to be a 1,000-year reign. You'll be with the Lord kind of in secret, in heaven, in the heavenly realms, until the rapture until the tribulation is mm-hmm. through, and then the second return, and then the 1,000-year reign, and the final war, and then the new heaven and new earth. But if you're raptured in that version, there's nothing left that has to happen. When that happens, you'll be with the Lord forever in one form or another. For those who believe that it all happens at one time, like the Amillennial, even I think probably the post-tribulational view, you have to go through a lot more junk, a lot more struggle, and the great wrath and all that, tribulation time, Antichrist, all that. But still, once you are caught up and it's judgment and it all happens at one time, you're with the Lord forever from then on.
Mm-hmm. These different views, I've looked at them, and they use Scripture in chunks of it, and then it feels like in order to, like you were going to write a movie plot, mm-hmm. In order to make a full plot, a full movie, you have to use artistic license for parts of it.
Right.
And that artistic license changes from view to view, but there's still this chunk where it's artistic license.
Right.
Why people fight over, hey, this is how I filled in the blanks, and this is why I'm right. The reality is there is a blank still in every one of these views.
Yes.
And so that's why we're saying not fight on it. But right. the fact that we're caught up, even though it changes somewhere in the timeline, it's mm-hmm. still in the Bible, and we can hold our
right.
hand.
And people don't like gaps, mm-hmm. right? I mean, let's face it. We have things that happen to us in our life. We're promised, if we're Christ followers, nothing can separate us from the love of God, right? neither height nor depth nor anything in creation. We're promised that God can work out all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. It's all right there. The problem is there's a gap. It hasn't happened yet. We struggle with gaps. We struggle with them, and we want to fill them in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're made that way. I think our brains are made to want to fill in gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Faith is hard for us. And so I don't know the answer to some questions. And I'm okay with not knowing. I'm not okay with not knowing anything. I mean, the kind of faith that we're called on to have is not an uneducated, kind of, whatever, just believe and don't use your brain, check your brains at the door. No, we have evidence for what we believe, but there's still a gap in that we have to trust that God knows what he's doing. It's going to be clear to us. There's some things that they're so far beyond our ability to understand that even if he tried to tell it to us, we wouldn't get it. His ways are above our ways.
Right.
His thoughts are not our thoughts. So it's not all blind faith, but there is some faith that we are required to have as we walk through this. And there'll be some questions that we have that will have to be answered on the back end, and I'm okay with that. Hindsight is 20/20, and that's the way the first coming of Christ was. And it's like, okay. And then so why wouldn't God work the same way in the second coming, where there's some things that they didn't get, there's some things that we won't get, but in the end we'll all go, oh, boom, there it is, I see it. Paul says, now we know in part, but then we will know fully even as we're fully known.
Right.
And so fighting over these things that aren't quite clear, I mean, that's what Christians are known for our love. And wisdom. Wisdom is to trust God and to see things as he sees them, and even to act the right way, to know the right truth and apply the right truth in the right way. And there's some things that are absolutely clear, and some things we have to give some freedom in, and we Christians don't tend to do that very well, especially if we're immature. Mm-hmm. And let's face it, I think that I'm fairly mature as a Christian, but there are moments of immaturity. The most mature people on the planet, parents, in the physical realm, fight with each other and act like children. We Christians who are mature, I see Paul arguing with Barnabas. They get in a fight and they separate. Immaturity. Mm-hmm. It happens. We have to confess it, and so we have to, when we fight for the wrong things or even the right things in the wrong way, we have to make that right.
Jim, because of this topic with the return of Jesus and we're being caught up, and then there's tribulation, these topics all get intermixed in the different views of the end times. What are the kind of the four major views, and can you give us an overview of those?
Yeah, well, we've got these graphs in the resources in the glossary of terms that'll be helpful for you. But the dispensational, which is the kind of the more modern day, most popular view, Left Behind series view, mm-hmm. is the view that the next thing that will happen, because Israel is now in the land again, that's like a major marker, mm-hmm. right? And so the result will be, the next thing will happen will be a rapture, caught up, but it's more of like a secret rapture, in the sense that everybody will notice somebody's missing, but they won't necessarily know why or believe it. I'm guessing that the world will come up with some sort of explanation, maybe tied to space aliens or something along
right.
those ways, right? That they'll be able to function. That will be, from the dispensational view, that's the church being taken out of the way, first 4 chapters of the book of Revelation. Now that will tip to the Antichrist being revealed. There'll be a big enough crisis that the countries kind of come together, and they kind of choose a one world government. The Antichrist comes. He will make a deal with Israel, which is now back in the land. It's supposed to last 7 years, but in the middle of that, he will kind of come in and set up the abomination at 3.5 years in Israel, and which will lead to a big war in Israel, And I mean, briefly, I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot of
right.
detail, but then the next thing that will happen will be Jesus will come and wrestle. There'll be a great turning back to the Lord that Romans 11 talks about, and for the Jews. And then Jesus will come and rescue Israel, and then he'll set up a earthly kingdom for 1,000 years. The devil will be cast. The Antichrist will be cast into hell. The devil will be locked away for 1,000 years, and then he'll get out one last time and lead one last rebellion against Christ, and Christ will crush him, and then it'll be the great white throne judgment and moving on. If you're pre-trib, that's kind of your version. If you're mid-trib, it's the Antichrist makes the deal, the church is there, and then in the middle of the tribulation, 3.5 years in, that's when the great rapture, the secret rapture, will happen.
At the abomination.
Right.
Abomination, rapture, same time.
Same time, that kind of time. And again, remember, even within each of these versions, there's variations, and not everybody agrees or explains it the same way. People who categorize themselves in one of these might have a variation of different ways in which this looks. Okay, so then you've got the Amillennial view that says that the millennium isn't a literal millennium, and numbers tend to be types, or 1,000 years isn't a literal 1,000 years. It's a time period in which Christians will be alive when this happens, when the Antichrist comes and the Great Tribulation. They'll have to live through that. And that happens after this period of time where the church, the millennium, is kind of spiritualized, in that we lived in the millennium where the devil was kind of held back and wasn't able to stop the gospel from being preached. So we lived through the millennium, or are living through it. It's a time when the church is protected. The gates of hell won't prevail against the church. The church is being able to move out. But then the Great Tribulation and all of that will happen when the devil is kind of let go. And now he can thwart, destroy, smash the church. The church isn't going to win. Do you understand what I'm saying? And now the great persecution and all of that happens. So that's kind of the millennial. Then when Jesus returns, it's all at once at the end. And at the rapture, you're caught up with the Lord, but then he brings you right down immediately, and it's Judgment Day.
But we're in the middle. I mean, that's basically started at resurrection,
Right.
to now.
Right.
And so essentially with that view, we'd only be waiting for Satan to come out and start crushing the church.
There's nothing left except for the Antichrist and all that to happen, and so we're going to live through all that. Then you've got what I would call the post-millennial view, which is an old, outdated view that I think, when the Catholics kind of came up with that, in that the whole world became Catholic sort of a thing, and that's the great millennium, right? And they actually believe that the world is going to get better and better and better before the Lord returns. As the church expands and goes out into the world, it's going to get better and better and better. And it's going to be almost like, Christ reigned through the church, right? That came from the Catholics. And what we know about that is that the reign of the church has never looked like the world got better and better and better. In fact, the Catholic Church was very corrupt. And the world has always been evil. So if that version, if the world was going to become a great place, when has that happened yet? I just kind of dismiss that one altogether.
It's still a major view
in the past, not so much anymore.
In the past, because it is church-centric, not...
and it was formed back when the Catholic did come into power, and they did, all the countries, or most of the countries, were Catholic ruled to some extent, from Rome through the kings, all of that. So again, there's a variety of other versions of that, but those are like the dispensational, premillennial. And again, there's 4 views of the millennium you can get. It's a resource we put out there. There's a variety of different resources that we would suggest if they really want to know more about it. We'd suggest that they do that.
Well, it is a lot to take in, these different 4 views, but we do have a glossary of terms, so you can keep this straight in your own life groups and for your own home and for your own interest. It's at reallifeministries.com/endtimes, and we look forward to you joining us next time as we continue on this topic.